He never thought anyone would notice him again. Daniel Carter was 62, a retired firefighter living alone in a small town in Pennsylvania. Every morning, he woke to the same routine: brewed coffee, looked out the kitchen window at the quiet street, and listened to the birds chirp over the hum of the neighborhood. The house felt emptier than ever since his wife passed 3 years ago, and his son moved across the country for work, leaving only occasional texts and birthday calls. He was invisible in ways most people never understand, not because he was unkind or uninteresting, but because life had slowly trained everyone to see him as background noise, a man who had done his job, paid his taxes, and smiled politely while fading into the walls of every room he entered. Yet, Daniel carried a secret. For decades, he had kept a journal, not a diary, not for public consumption, a collection of memories, regrets, and moments of unspoken love and fear. Entries about his marriage, about the daughter he and his wife had lost in infancy, about the haunting nights when the fire station felt lonelier than any house he'd ever saved. One morning, while dusting the shelves, Daniel found the journal under a loose floorboard in the study. He hadn't opened it in years. When he did, the words hit him like a tidal wave. The memories were raw, unpolished, and entirely his own. They told a story no one knew, of courage, of grief, of love and mistakes, of the silent man who had saved strangers but could not save himself from invisibility. That evening, he sat in his favorite chair and began to write again, not in the old journal, but on a fresh notebook. Words spilled out without restraint, reflections on life, confessions of regret, and hopes he never shared with anyone. He wrote about being a man who survived tragedies, but almost forgot how to live. He didn't know why he wrote it, maybe to be heard, maybe to remember himself. The next day, he took a bold step. He emailed a local newspaper. The subject line read, "A life mostly unseen." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. And then he waited. Daniel didn't expect a response. He thought the email would disappear into some inbox, ignored or deleted, like most of the things he'd ever offered to the world. But within hours, his phone buzzed. It was from a journalist at a regional paper. "We received your submission," the message read. "We'd like to publish it. Your words are powerful, honest. People need to hear this." Daniel stared at the screen. Powerful? Honest? People need to hear this? He almost didn't reply, but something in him, something he had buried under decades of quiet, urged him forward. "Yes," he typed. "Thank you." The article appeared the following Sunday. Daniel didn't read it immediately. He sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming in front of him, and waited. Slowly, he picked up the paper and unfolded the page. His story was there, his exact words. The story of a man who had saved lives in fires he barely survived himself. The story of a father and husband who had lost his daughter before she could even speak. The story of years spent unnoticed, quietly enduring, and quietly hoping. Then he read the comments online. People wrote about him as if they had known him for years. "My father could never talk about his own grief. This made me cry. I feel like he's speaking for every man in my family who was told to be strong and hide pain. Thank you for reminding us that survival doesn't mean you have to disappear." Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. No one had ever spoken to him or about him like this. Not his family, not his friends, not the strangers he rescued from blazing buildings or car accidents. For the first time in decades, he felt seen. But visibility comes with a cost. A week later, he received another message, this one from someone closer to home than he expected. "Dad?" It was his son, Jason. Jason had never called without an excuse, never stayed long when he visited, never asked how his father felt after his mother passed. But now he was reaching out. Daniel didn't know if he should answer. Old habits whispered, "Don't expect anything. Protect yourself. Stay quiet." But he typed anyway. "Yes, it's me." The reply was almost immediate. "I read your story. I I didn't know. I didn't understand. Can we talk?" Daniel sat back, staring at the screen. For years, he had believed connection was impossible, that maybe he was too far gone, too invisible, too ordinary. Now, a bridge was forming, slowly, tremulously. And he realized that sharing his pain hadn't just freed him, it had opened the door for others to find him. For the first time in decades, Daniel Carter wasn't alone. But the story wasn't finished, because reconnecting meant confronting everything he had avoided: regret, guilt, loss, and the hard truths about the man he had become. And some truths are heavier than fire. Daniel didn't sleep well that night. He stared at the ceiling, remembering his wife's laughter, the little rituals they had shared before she passed, remembering how he had silently carried the weight of grief, never speaking it aloud, never asking for help, remembering the daughter he lost, the one he barely talked about even to his wife. Jason's messages sat open on his phone. He wanted to talk, and Daniel wanted to respond, but every instinct told him to stay quiet. In the morning, he called. "Hi, Dad," Jason said, his voice tight. I just read the article. I didn't know." Daniel listened as his son stumbled over words he had never expected to hear. Words that admitted guilt, shame, and loneliness. Words that mirrored his own. "I didn't understand what you went through," Jason continued. "I never thought about how hard it was for you after Mom died." Daniel swallowed. "I didn't want you to worry," he said softly. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know," Jason whispered, "but you were lonely, and I never noticed." Daniel felt a tear slide down his cheek. Not anger, not regret, just relief that someone finally saw him. They talked for hours that day, about the past, about their family, about moments lost and what they could do now, about fear, about grief, about the quiet that had haunted both of them. By the end of the conversation, Daniel realized something he hadn't in years. Connection doesn't erase pain, but it transforms it. In the following weeks, Daniel began to write more, not just for himself, but for others like him, people who felt invisible, who endured silently, who survived without being seen. He published his thoughts online, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people of all ages: veterans, widowers, young men afraid to speak, women caring for aging parents, strangers who finally felt understood. Daniel had spent a lifetime saving others, yet never allowed himself to be rescued. Now his words were lifting him, giving him the same solace he had once given to others. And yet, amidst the new attention, a question kept him awake. Could he truly reconnect with his family fully? Could he forgive himself for the years lost to silence? The answer wouldn't come easy. It would demand courage he had almost forgotten he had. But Daniel Carter had learned something crucial. Survival is not enough. To live fully, you must face the truths you've avoided. And sometimes telling your story is the first step. Daniel and Jason met for the first time in years at a small diner near the edge of town. The smell of coffee and frying bacon felt familiar, yet foreign, like stepping back into a life they had both left behind. They sat across from each other, quiet at first, unsure of how to navigate the years of absence. Daniel watched his son, noting the slight tremor in his hands, the tired lines etched into his face, and the way his eyes searched for reassurance. "I wasn't a good father," Jason said finally, his voice low. "I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving you alone. I thought, if you were strong, you'd manage." Daniel shook his head. "We both thought we were protecting each other," he said gently, but we were just surviving in silence. Jason swallowed. I don't know how to fix it. You don't have to fix it, Daniel replied. You just have to show up. That's enough. For hours they talked about his mother, about the daughter they never had, about the grief they carried silently. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to share the darkest memories of firefighting, the calls that haunted him, the lives he couldn't save, the nights he cried alone in his car after returning home. Jason listened without judgment, without distraction, without trying to correct the past, just listening. When they parted that evening, Daniel felt something he hadn't in decades: hope. A fragile, trembling hope that maybe, finally, the gaps between them could be bridged. The days that followed were different. Jason called more often. They shared small moments of life: a photo of his daughter's birthday cake, a message about the dog he had rescued from the shelter, a laugh over a failed attempt at making pancakes. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to write. His stories were no longer just personal confessions. They had become lessons, messages of hope for anyone who felt invisible, overlooked, or trapped by years of unspoken grief. One night, as he reviewed the latest messages from readers, one stood out. Reading your story gave me the courage to call my father. We hadn't spoken in 15 years. I'm going to see him this weekend. Thank you. Daniel smiled, tears pooling in his eyes. For the first time, he realized the true power of his words. They didn't just heal him, they healed others. And yet, despite this newfound purpose, an old question lingered. Could he let himself love again? Could he open his heart to joy after so much loss? Could he allow himself the life he had been too afraid to live? Because survival had carried him this far, but living, truly living, required risk. And Daniel Carter had never been afraid of fire. Now he was learning to face life the same way. It was a rainy afternoon when Daniel received the call. The hospital, a fire, a former colleague from the station, Mark, injured, trapped in the chaos of his own courage. Mark had always been reckless, brave to a fault, and now he needed help. Daniel didn't hesitate. Old instincts kicked in like they had decades ago. He grabbed his coat, keys, and journal, the weight of both tools and memories pressing on him. Driving through the storm, he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Alive in purpose, alive in fear, alive in responsibility. The fire was small, but deadly. Smoke curled like snakes, and the heat pressed against his skin through layers of protection. Daniel found Mark on the floor, coughing, trapped under a fallen beam. He lifted him with effort, muscles protesting, lungs burning, and carried him to safety. Outside, soaked and trembling, Mark looked at him with gratitude and awe. You didn't have to come," Mark gasped. Daniel shook his head. "I did." But while the public praised his bravery, Daniel felt something more personal stirring. The fire reminded him that life was fragile, unpredictable, and fleeting, and that he had spent too many years letting fear and grief dictate the story of his life. That evening, back at home, he stared at his reflection in the mirror. His hands still smelled of smoke. His body ached, and yet, for the first time in decades, he felt fully present in his own skin. Then came another message from Emily, his daughter-in-law. "Jason is moving back for a while. He wants you to meet him halfway for the holidays." Daniel's heart tightened. Holidays had been empty for years, just reminders of absence and loss. Now there was a chance for connection. He thought of the fires he had fought, the lives he had saved, the lives he had let slip by unnoticed. He realized that survival had always been part of him. But living, that had to be intentional. He picked up his journal and wrote, "Life doesn't wait for permission. Grief doesn't define us. Fear can't stop the heart that still beats." And then he made a decision. He would embrace the chaos, the love, the family, the risk. He would not let silence rule him any longer. Because bravery wasn't just about rushing into flames, it was about stepping into life, even when it scared you, even when it had already taken so much. And Daniel Carter, firefighter, father, widower, survivor, was ready to live again. The drive to see Jason was quiet, yet heavy with anticipation. Rain drizzled against the windshields, washing the streets in muted reflections. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of what awaited. When he arrived at Jason's apartment, the door swung open before he could knock. Jason stood there, hesitant but hopeful, his eyes searching for the father he hadn't truly known in years. "Dad," Jason said simply. Daniel stepped forward, closing the distance that decades of absence had built. Words failed him at first. There was nothing left to say about the past that hadn't already been said. Jason broke the silence. "I've made mistakes. You've made mistakes. But we're here now, and I want to try." Daniel nodded, feeling tears sting his eyes. "Me too," he whispered. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of fresh cookies Emily had been baking. The warmth of home wrapped around him in a way he had almost forgotten. For the first time in decades, Daniel didn't feel invisible. He felt present. They talked for hours about grief, about joy, about regrets and small victories. Daniel shared the firefighting stories he had never told Jason, the nights he cried alone, the lives he saved, and the ones he couldn't. Jason listened, absorbing each word like a man finally learning who his father truly was. "I'm proud of you," Jason said finally, "for surviving, for sharing your story, for still being here." Daniel swallowed hard. "Thank you for showing up." That night, Daniel went to bed feeling something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Not a fragile, uncertain hope, but a deep-rooted hope. He realized that life's second chances were rare, but possible. That even after decades of silence, reconnection could still be found. And just as he drifted off to sleep, he knew that the next chapter of his life would not be defined by loss, by absence, or by fear. It would be defined by courage. Daniel woke before sunrise, the house still and quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. He stepped outside, the cold morning air filling his lungs, and watched the sky slowly change color. In that moment, he realized how many mornings he had missed while surviving instead of living. How many sunrises he had slept through because he didn't believe the day needed him. Later that morning, Jason asked him to come along to his daughter Lily's school event. Daniel hesitated. Crowded rooms still made him uneasy. Joy felt unfamiliar, but he said yes. Lily ran toward him when she saw him, wrapping her small arms around his legs. "Grandpa," she laughed, as if he had always been there, as if absence had never existed. Something inside Daniel broke open, not painfully, gently. During the event, Daniel noticed other grandparents, parents, families laughing freely. For years, he had believed that kind of happiness was no longer meant for him. Yet here he was, holding a paper crown Lily had made just for him, heart fuller than it had been in decades. That evening, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel and Jason sat on the porch. The air was cool. The world felt honest. "I spent my whole life thinking strength meant silence," Daniel said. "Turns out strength is letting people see you." Jason nodded. "I learned that too late with you, but not too late, I hope." Daniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "We're here now. That's what matters." Later that night, Daniel opened his journal one last time and wrote words that would change everything. "If this is the second half of my life, I will live it out loud. He decided then that his story wasn't finished, that his pain could become purpose, that his voice, once quiet, could help others feel less alone. And for the first time since the fire that took so much from him, Daniel felt ready. Ready to forgive, ready to love, ready to live. Daniel stood alone at the old fire station one last time. The building was quieter now. New faces, new names, new stories being written without him. He ran his hand along the brick wall, feeling the weight of years pressed into every inch. This place had taken so much from him, but it had also shaped the man he became. He wasn't angry anymore. He was grateful. That evening, his family gathered for dinner. The table was loud, messy, alive. Lily climbed into his lap holding a drawing she had made. It was a picture of a house, a sun, and a man with a big smile. "That's you, Grandpa," she said. Daniel's chest tightened. He kissed the top of her head, tears quietly falling. For decades, he believed his best years were behind him, that loss had written the ending of his story, that silence was safer than hope. He had been wrong. Life didn't end when he lost everything. It paused and waited for him to come back. Later that night, Daniel posted one final message online. "I spent years thinking being strong meant standing alone. I was wrong. If you're watching this and feeling invisible, please know you still matter. It's never too late to speak, never too late to love, never too late to live." The message spread faster than anything he had written before. Thousands of people shared it, commented, cried, called their parents, forgave old wounds. Daniel closed his laptop and looked around the room filled with laughter, warmth, and life. He hadn't just survived the fire. He hadn't just survived grief. He had survived silence. And now he was finally living. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you love, if it made you feel a little less alone, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more real, emotional stories that matter. Because stories don't just entertain us, they heal us. Thank you for listening.